So I know you're probably thinking, what? Because College Board only announces that they have 4 types of reading and writing questions, but I'm telling you that there's 7. College Board's sections are really broad, like they include vocabulary and text analysis comparisons all in one section. So in this video, I'm gonna break those sections apart and go through every single type of reading and writing question that you're gonna see in the essay, dissect them, and make sure that you know exactly how to answer each problem. So if you're looking to score a 700 plus on your reading and writing score on the SAT, this is the video that you need. Okay, so just like a brief overview of the reading and writing modules before we get started. You have 2 modules of reading and writing. Each includes 27 questions and you have to complete it in 32 minutes. The first half is largely reading comprehension type questions. The second half is largely writing, syntax, grammar, all that type of thing. And if you get enough questions right on your first module, then you'll get a harder second module. If you get more questions wrong, then you'll get an easier second module. So I'm just gonna open up one of College Board's practice tests, and we're gonna go through the problems from all the different problem types and talk about them. Oh, and one thing I think that would be helpful to mention are College Board's 4 sections that they score you on the SAT. There are 4 categories, right? I've broken them down to 7 for you. Information of ideas, craft and structure, expression of ideas, and standard English conventions. Here's the practice test. Let's go ahead and select which one we want. I'll go and just choose SAT Practice 4 since that's the first one off. And so before I start, I'm just going to say the first section that I think is really a big thing on the SAT is the vocab. So that's going to be my first type of question that we're going to talk about on the SAT. The vocab covers the first couple questions on the exam. Let's see if we just go through. That's vocab, that's vocab. It's 4. This is question 5, still vocab. 6. So this one, on this particular exam, the first 6 questions are vocab. So I'm going to go ahead and just pick one in the middle because generally the way the exam is structured so that within each of those sections they go from easy to hard. So I'll just pick a medium difficulty one. So first of all, don't read the answers yet. This is how you solve this type of problem. You don't need to read the answers. You recognize it's a vocab question because you've got a bunch of words over there. But immediately forget them, toss them out of your brain, throw them in the trash can. You don't need them. Cover them up. Okay. Let's look at the passage. And let's read it and try to form a word that could fill in the blank in your own mind instead of looking at the answer choices. Set in a world where science fiction tropes exist as everyday realities, Charles Yu's, I don't know, 2010 novel, How to Live Safely in a Science Fictional Universe, traces a time traveler's quest to find his father. Because the journey at the novel's center is so blank, with the protagonist ricocheting chaotically across time, the reader often wonders whether the pair will ever be united. So it gives you some ideas about the novel here. It says the journey at the novel center is so something. And then it goes later on to talk about the protagonist, who's going to probably be like the main character. He's the main part of the novel, ricocheting chaotically across time. So he's going to be pretty chaotic in itself. The novel's center maybe is kind of goes up and down. It's fluctuating, and it's a little bit unpredictable, so to speak. So maybe you put that down as your fill in the blank there, as you'd say it's unpredictable. The journey at the novel center is so unpredictable. And so then, now that you have a word that you've put in that to that blank, now you can look at the answer choices. So we have haphazard. That actually kind of means what we're looking for. It means all over the place. There's no order, rhyme, or reason. Premeditated, it's kind of the opposite of what we're looking for. It means it's well thought out and planned. Inspirational, that's not really what we're going for. or he's not being inspired. This novel doesn't seem to indicate that it's inspiring. And then fruitless, nothing seems to be indicated in this novel that it's fruitless, that there's no worth in it. So haphazard is definitely going to be our answer here. Okay, so there's two types of vocab questions. There's where you fill in the blank, and then there's also where you have to give like a synonym or explain what something means. It's very similar. You create a word in your head. So in this type of problem, you read the prompt and you just create a synonym for answers and then compare it to your answer choices. Again, don't read the answer choices before you read and create a synonym in your mind. Okay, so after the vocab, you're going to find the main text questions, like asking you for the main idea. And so this generally is going to be like 3 or 4 problems in the test. You want to look at the prompts, though, generally before actually reading the passages. So this one says, according to the text, why would a helicopter built for Earth be unable to fly on Mars? So the main purpose questions are asking you for one of two things. Generally, if they're asking you to give a summary of the passage or to be able to pick out some particular piece of information, paraphrase it, and just find that specific detail. This is one of the more detail-oriented questions. If you find, like, this one is one of the more broad questions asking you for a summary. And let's see how many questions there are of this type again. Looks like there's 3 in this problem set, so I'll go ahead and pick the middle one once again for a medium difficulty question. Okay, so let's go ahead and read the prompt. It says, which choice best states the main idea of the text? One trick I have is you don't actually need to read any of this stuff here. You just have to read the actual text. So let's go ahead and read that now. Thornton alone held Buck. The rest of mankind was as nothing. Chance travelers might praise or pet him, but he was cold under it all, and from a too demonstrative man, he would get up and walk away. When Thornton's partners, Hans and Pete, arrived on the long expected raft, Buck refused to notice them until he learned that they were close to Thornton. After that, he tolerated them in a passive sort of way, accepting favors from them as though he favored them by accepting. So this story is talking about an animal, probably a dog. Yes, it's a dog. And his name is Buck. And so it's kind of talking about how much, like, obviously he loves his master, but he doesn't really show affection to the other people around him. It's just his master that he does. But he ends up tolerating these 2 guys, Hans and Pete, because they're close to his master. So he's not affectionate to other people, but he does love and he's loyal to his master Thornton. That's kind of what I picked up from the text. So let's see if there are any answers that seem to represent the idea. Buck has become less social since he began living with Thornton. Well, that can't be the case because he doesn't talk about what his life was like before Thornton. And so it says Buck mistrusts humans and does his best to avoid them. Well, we know that that's not the case because he trusts Thornton. Buck has been especially well liked by most of Thornton's friends. Doesn't necessarily seem to indicate that. I mean, it doesn't talk about how well the other people liked him. It says they praised him and such, but not that they absolutely loved him. And it doesn't say what Hans and Pete thought of him. Choice D. Buck holds Thornton in higher regard than any other person. Well, this really definitely seems to indicate what we're looking for. It talks about how Buck is really Thornton's dog and how he obeys what he wants and all of his commands. So this is definitely the choice we're going for. You can kind of see how in this type of problem, I went through all the choices and I recognized that they were too specific. They talked about something too specifically, and most of them extrapolated beyond the details that were actually provided in the text. You have to stay within the text. Choice C might have been a question that people could very easily have gotten caught on because it does seem to suggest that like people had praised him and they might have liked him, but it's too specific. That's not the whole idea of the text. Okay, so the third type of problem that you're going to see on the SAT reading and writing is going to be the type of problem that asks you to use evidence to like support a hypothesis or support a claim. It's asking you to go a little bit outside of the text that's provided and reason and use your logical skills. And these are problem types that students often will struggle on. So let's go ahead and see how many types of problems there are in this section that will cover that. First, I want to note that oftentimes you'll see like a claim where they want you to support a claim with like poem quotes or book quotes, like you see right here in this problem. Or they'll have a text 1 and a text 2, and they want you to compare them in some way. Or they'll have like a graph that you have to interpret. So you have 1 here, you have 2, just 2 questions of that type in the section. So I'll go and pick the harder one. So in this section, you definitely want to read the prompt before you look on what's on the other side of the page at the answers. So, geographer Adebayo Uluwole Iludokian, if anybody knows how to pronounce that, please put that in the comments below. And his colleagues surveyed small-scale farmers in 3 locations in Ondo State, Nigeria, which has mountainous terrain in the north, an urbanized center, and coastal terrains in the south to learn more about their practices, like the types of crops they mainly cultivated. In some regions, female farmers were found to be especially prominent in the cultivation of specific types of crops, and even constituted the majority of farmers who cultivated those crops, for instance. Okay, so the most important part of this text is going to always be the last section. You only read what's beforehand so you get an idea of the context and you can actually understand what they're talking about. Especially with the harder, more difficult types of questions, then you need to read what's before that. But for the easier questions, you don't even always have to read everything before the last sentence. Okay, let's go ahead and reread that last sentence. In some regions, female farmers were found to be especially prominent in the cultivation of specific types of crops, even constituted the majority of farmers who cultivated those crops. Okay, so what my guess would be is that this graph above is going to talk about crops in some way and the genders of the people cultivating them. So let's take a look at it. Percentage of Ondo State small-scale farmers who are female by main crop grown. So this question is suggesting that females are going to be majority of farmers who cultivated certain crops. So if we're going to support the hypothesis or that the colleagues made or the conclusion that the colleagues made, then we need to find a crop that women were the majority of the farmer of that type of crop. Let's go ahead and take a look at the prompt for the question, just to make sure I'm on the right track. It says, which choice most effectively uses data from the graph to complete the example? Yes. So in any of these regions, does it appear that women are the majority of the farmers in that area? So you have cereals, root crops, and non-root vegetables. And you're going to look at the 50% bar. It's right here. So it appears that in South Ondo and North Ondo, women are the majority farmers of non-root vegetables. So we're going to look for something like that in the answers. It says most of the farmers who mainly cultivated cereals and most of the farmers who mainly cultivated non-root vegetables in South Ondo are women. Well, that doesn't line up because it says cereals. It doesn't just say non-root vegetables. So move on. More women in Central Ondo mainly cultivated root crops than mainly cultivated cereals. It's not talking about who was the majority. It's comparing 2 back. That's not what we're looking for. It says most of the farmers who mainly cultivated non-root vegetables in North and South Ondo were women. That's exactly what we were looking for. Okay, so we'll go ahead and select that and just read the last one. A relatively equal portion of women across the 3 regions of Ondo mainly cultivated cereals. This is not what we're looking for. It's not talking about who were the majority of the farmers that were women in those areas at all. Not what we're looking for again. Okay, so that's how you solve that type of problem, is really following that last sentence, making sure you're lining up with that last sentence, interpreting the graph, and making sure that your answer lines up with that. Like, this was partially right, but the fact that there were cereals in there was wrong, and then, yeah, it has to be 100% right. So that's how you do the supporting a hypothesis question. Okay, so the final problem type in the SAT reading section before you move on to the writing is going to be a question that asks you to complete the text, to most logically complete the text. In this particular exam, there's only 2, at least within this section, so I'll go ahead and choose the more difficult of the 2. My suggestion for this is go ahead and just read the passage first, don't look at the answers. So, herbivorous sauropod dinosaurs could grow more than 100 feet long and weigh up to 80 tons, and some researchers have attributed the evolution of sauropods to such massive sizes to increased plant production resulting from high levels of atmospheric carbon dioxide during the Mesozoic era. However, there is no evidence of significant spikes in carbon dioxide levels coinciding with relevant periods in sauropod evolution, such as when the first large sauropods appeared, when several sauropod lineages underwent further evolution toward gigantism, or when sauropods reached their maximum known sizes, suggesting that. So, for this type of problem, I would generally go ahead and recommend that you read them twice. First, that you read it once and then pick an answer, and then you read it a second time. So, first, you kind of want to get an idea of what they're asking for here. What is the relationship between increasing size of sauropods and carbon dioxide? Generally, it seems to indicate that there really isn't a strong correlation. It says that there's no significant evidence that spikes in carbon dioxide levels coincide with relevant periods of sauropod evolution. So the original hypothesis or thought the researchers were thinking has kind of been proved incorrect. So you're going to look for something along those lines in the answer choices. It says fluctuations in atmospheric carbon dioxide affected different sauropod lineages differently. Doesn't seem to indicate that at all. It doesn't talk about different sauropod lineages, not our question. The evolution of larger body sizes in sauropods did not depend on increased atmospheric carbon dioxide. Definitely seems what we're going for. The 2 did not relate to each other. That's probably our answer, but we'll go ahead and keep reading. Atmospheric carbon dioxide was higher when the largest known sauropods lived than it was when the first sauropods appeared. Doesn't talk about that at all in the text. It's going too far of what we're given here in the prompt. Sauropods probably would not have evolved to such immense sizes if atmospheric carbon dioxide had been even slightly higher. It doesn't really talk about how high it had to be or how low it had to be in the text. Again, it goes too far outside of what we're given. So B is definitely our choice. In this type of question, it's key to know your details, and that's why it's important to go ahead and read it a second time. If you want, you can pause now and read it a second time and check that answer choice, because so oftentimes the other questions are going to go just a little bit outside of the text, and it needs to be thoroughly within the text. You cannot extrapolate too far. So that's how you solve the most logically complete the text type question. Yay, we made it to the writing section, guys, and you're still with me. Okay, so this first part of the writing section is going to include your grammar and your syntax, your punctuation, and your verb endings, and all of those fun things. So maybe there are really 8 categories. Like an A is punctuation and B is verbs. I don't know. I'll go ahead and go through both types of questions here, and let's go ahead and talk about how many of those problem types there are in each section. So you've got a punctuation one here, another punctuation one here, 2 punctuation, that's 3, punctuation 4. Sometimes they'll have like conjunctions and stuff in there. There's a verb one, so that's 1 verb. And then you have reorganizations of the sentences. It's general grammar syntax types rules. It doesn't fall within those 2 categories, but kind of falls in there too. And there's another verb one. Okay, so like 8 questions, 7 or 8 questions. Let me go try to find the beginning of the section now. Okay, we'll go ahead and go through some of these punctuation questions. Maybe I'll choose 16. That's either a medium or a harder type question. So let's go ahead and talk about the basic grammar rules before we go any further. Okay, so there's a couple different types of punctuations that are going to be tested on the SAT. Okay, so you're going to have first your parentheses, and the important thing to remember is that whenever you have an opening parenthesis, you must have a closing parenthesis. When you ever have a closing parenthesis, you must have an opening parenthesis. So they're going to come in pairs, and there's always going to be one in the text at some point, and search for that other parenthesis if there's a parenthesis in the answers, and make sure that you include that so you always have 2 in every text. The other type it's very similar, often to get mixed up, is a dash. Oftentimes you'll have 2 dashes together, but not always. It acts very similar to a parenthesis, and they're not going to make you choose between a dash and a parenthesis. In the situation, again, if you have a dash one place, you're going to have to add a dash another, typically. But if you have a parenthesis, you'll always have to add another one. So I hope that makes sense. We're going to talk about our other more commonly seen rules. You're going to have independent clauses are separated by either periods or semicolons, which is kind of like the colon with a comma at the bottom. And so you're going to take 2 complete sentences. So that's what an independent clause is a sentence that if you put a period in the middle, you could have one sentence stand alone and one sentence stand alone, and it wouldn't sound weird, it wouldn't sound strange. You have a subject, you have a verb, and the verb makes sense within the context of the question. So then your dependent clauses are when one of the clauses is complete, it's independent, but one of the clauses relies on the other one, and if you put a period there, it would sound strange. You couldn't do that. And so you're going to have a comma there, typically. So there's 2 other types of punctuation you might see on here. One is a colon, and that's typically what can be when you're giving like an example or a list of things. Not gonna be dependent, it will be dependent, it's not gonna be independent, but it doesn't come in pairs. And then the final thing is a question mark, and that kind of goes with your verbs, is if the sentence is asking for a question, the order you're gonna put them in is you're gonna put a verb first, and then you're gonna put your subject, or you're gonna put a question word like what or where, and then your verb. So sometimes they'll have questions that include questions in the answer that you could be answering in the form of a question. And if that's the case, decide, does a question make sense in this sentence, and then make sure that you include all of the words in the right order. Okay, and then we have our verb rules. So on the SAT, they're typically going to be testing your knowledge with moving back and forth between present and present participle and past participle and infinitive forms. So I'm going to give you the example of a verb. We'll just say like to play. That's a very easy example. To play is a verb that stands by itself. If you're going to use it in a sentence, then you have to have another verb, like I am going to play. It cannot be the only verb in the sentence. If you have like play, I will play, I am playing. If you use it in a present form, I play, or she plays, you play, then you're going to have a S ending or non-S ending, depending on the person that it's in. But you use in the SAT structure, use the context of the sentences around it to determine whether it needs to be in the present or the past, present participle, past participle, all those types of things. If it's in the past, then you're going to say played, they played, she played, I played, with the ed ending. And again, you use that context to decide, should I be talking the past? If so, I'm going to add the played. Sometimes you're going to have what's called the present participle form, and you're saying, like, I am playing, she is playing, and in that type of sentence, then you're indicating that the action is currently going on, and it's a little bit more present, I guess that's a way to describe it. Again, you'll be able to read it based on the context of the sentence, that they're all in present participle form as well. And then past participle is kind of the opposite. I was playing. It's the indication that something was being done in the past, but it might not necessarily have stopped either. So that's a basic breakdown of your verbs. You're going to have a lot of to-be verbs tested on the exam, but you'll also have a lot of other types of verbs tested as well. Okay, back to our punctuation question, now that we've gotten all of those grammar rules answered. So, one important thing to remember when you're dealing with a question like we have here with a apostrophe, apostrophes are used to indicate ownership. And so if you have a word like, for example, the doctor, in order to indicate ownership, then you can put the doctor apostrophe S. It's the doctor's stethoscope. It indicates that it belongs to one doctor. But if you have multiple doctors, maybe all the doctors use the same stethoscope for some reason, then you'll have doctors apostrophe. So that's one important thing to note before we dive into this question. So let's go ahead and read the passage and then we can answer the problem. Chang Dang and her colleagues at the University of Washington recently ran simulations to determine the extent to which individual snow grains' physical properties affect the amount of light reflected on a snowy surface. So, in this type of question, we first need to figure out, are they talking about a single snow grain or multiple snow grains? And then also a single physical property or multiple physical properties. So one thing that's important to note is in this type of question, it's either going to be both singular or both plural, because it wouldn't make sense to have multiple snow grains all with one single physical property. And so I'm going to want to go ahead and decide, is it multiple grains or a single grain? Well, looking at the answer questions, we can eliminate in this type of problem. We can take that one off because obviously there is some amount of ownership going on here. So it couldn't be that one. So let's try to read it within the context of this situation. If you're talking about a single snow grain, the extent to which individual snow grains, okay, that immediately is what stops me. Because if you're talking about a singular snow grain, then you're going to want to say the extent to which an individual snow grain's physical properties. So it has to be plural snow grains in order to make sense there. So we can eliminate A, because we know that if it were A, then the snow grain would be singular. Okay, so we have to which individual snow grains' physical properties affect the amount of light reflected off snowy surface. Well, physical properties in this case is not possessive. It's not showing ownership over anything. Physical properties doesn't own anything or possess anything. In fact, the word following it is a verb, and you're never going to have a possessive word followed by a verb. So it's going to have to be B. back to talk about the verb section of the writing portion. So this is a verb question. Go ahead and read the passage before looking at the answers. So it says, the progressive era in the United States witnessed the rise of numerous Black women's clubs, local organizations that advocated for racial and gender equality. Among the club's leaders, blank, Josephine St. Pierre Ruffin, founder of the Women's Era Club of Boston. So for this type of question, you're going to want to figure out three things. What person it is in, meaning first person like I did something, or second person like you did something, third person he, she, it did something. And within that, whether it's singular or plural, so like they would be third person plural of the singular form of he, she, it. You're going to also want to figure out what tense it's in. So is it happening in the past, the present, the future? And then also you're going to want to figure out, is the verb in a dependent clause or an independent clause? So let's figure out all those things before looking at the answer choices. Among the club's leaders, blank, Josephine St. Pierre Ruffin, founder of the Women's Era Club of Boston. So in order to have an independent sentence, you must have a subject and you must have a verb, and the verb has to be in the proper form. So we see that there is no other verb in the sentence other than this blank. So it must be in an independent form verb. Also, it's saying something for the person. It's saying something about Josephine. Josephine blank among the club's leaders. Josephine was among the club's leaders. That's kind of what you want to fill that in with. Or Josephine is, or Josephine will be. But you're kind of getting an idea, because this all happened in the progressive era, that this was in the past. So it's going to be in past form, it's going to be with a third person, and it's going to be in independent form. So let's look along the answer choices. Was, were, are, and have been. So are we can take off because that's the present form. Was actually kind of fits the context that we're looking for. Were does not fit the context, and I mean, you can read it aloud to yourself and see how it sounds wrong, because Josephine is not plural. And so you're looking for a singular form. And then again, have been is incorrect because it's a plural form. It would have to be has been in order to fit with Josephine. Among the club's leaders has been Josephine, not have been Josephine. So that's how you would solve a typical verb question. Figure out what's independent, dependent, what person and what number is it in, and then finally, what tense is it in? Future, present, or past. Two more problem types. So this type of problem is what I would call a transition problem. It's where you use transition words to be able to go from one sentence to another. And you're going to want to figure out what one sentence before the transition and what the sentence that the transition is in have to do with each other before looking at the answer choices. So again, read the passage first. Award-winning travel writer Linda Watanabe McFerrin considers the background research she conducts on destinations featured in her travel books to be its own reward. Blank, McFerrin admits to finding the research phase of her work just as fascinating and engaging as exploring a location in person. So it has something to do about the reward that both sentences, the one before the transition blank and the one including the transition blank, have something to do with the fascination and the enjoyment that McFerrin has in conducting the research for all of her books. So what it appears to me is that you're going in more detail about this first sentence. It's going to be some kind of transition word like specifically or in fact. So let's go ahead and look at the answer choices. You're not going to be looking for something that's like in contrast or nevertheless. Those are very typical words you'd see over there, but they don't make sense. By contrast, literally what I just said, definitely not what it is. Likewise would be if you're talking about like another example in the following sentence. That's not what it is. It continues to extrapolate on what Mick Farron did. Besides, doesn't make sense given the current context. In fact, that's exactly what I was saying. Okay, I'm so smart, guys. Yeah, that's how you do a transition question. Okay, so the final problem type that you'll see are the transition questions, and they cover all of the last questions in the writing section. And you can see from here they make up problems 22 through 27, so a pretty large portion. And guess what? I have some news for you. For most of these questions, you do not have to read the passage. You just have to look at the questions and the prompt. So I'm going to go and pick a medium difficulty problem again, and we'll try it, see if it'll work. Okay. The student wants to introduce Samuel Selvin and his novel, The Lonely Londoners, to a new audience. Which choice most effectively uses relevant information from the notes to accomplish the goal? Again, don't need to read the notes. So, in the note questions, you're generally going to have two things that you have to look for. Sometimes you need to look for a similarity. That would just be one, but in the more complicated problems, it's going to be two things. And in this, you want to introduce Sam Selvin, who's unfamiliar with him, and his novel to people, again, who are unfamiliar with the novel. So we're going to be looking for those two things in the answer choices. In 1956, Trinidadian author Samuel Selvin published one of his most celebrated novels. That introduces Samuel Selvin. He is Trinidadian, and it introduces his book, saying The Lonely Londoners, which is about a group of men who immigrate from the Caribbean to Great Britain after World War II. Okay, so that includes both things we're looking for. Gives an introduction of Samuel Selvin, and then it gives an introduction to the book. So, we'll go ahead and look at the other answers, but don't think they're going to be right. Samuel Selvin wrote the Moses Ascending after he wrote the Londoners. Doesn't do either. Doesn't introduce him, doesn't introduce his book. Or give extra information. It says those two things, but doesn't tell the audience more about them. The Lonely Londoners, a celebrated novel that was published in 1956, depicts post-World War II Caribbean migration from the perspective of a Trinidadian author. Does a great job with introducing the Lonely Londoners, but it doesn't even say Samuel Selvin's name. Doesn't introduce him properly. Some of the characters who appear in Samuel Selvin's Moses is Ascending also appear in the Lonely Londoners. It's kind of similar to Choice B, just doesn't really introduce the book and the author to unfamiliar audience. Choice A is definitely where you're going to want to go. Guys, that was officially the most exhausting video I think I've ever done. So, I hope you found it helpful. If you do, please please share it, please subscribe. It took me a while to create. I actually didn't look at any of the problems before trying to do the video because it's like 9:15 tonight and it's the night before I'm taking the SAT tomorrow. So, good luck. Hopefully I get a good score. But anyway, I hope this helps you to be able to get a 700 or above on your SAT score. I hope the breakdown of the different questions was helpful, and if you want any other particular questions broken down, you're welcome to send those to me, and I'll do a video on that particular problem and how to solve it. So, again, I don't think I have my personal information on my channel, but just leave a request for that, like in the comments. Also, one more thing I thought about while editing is if you were unfamiliar with any of the reading and writing tips, if they helped you in your exam, if you disagree with them, then please let me know about it in the comments below. Yeah, if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel. If you have an idea for future videos, then leave those in the comments below. I'd love to hear any of your thoughts. Again, if you have questions, leave those in the comments below. Yeah, I really hope you enjoyed the video. So, yeah, good luck on your SAT. Good luck on getting a great reading and writing score. If you follow these tips in my video, I'm sure you'll be able to score 700 or above.